So, the reason you're having trouble healing is because you're fighting the wrong battle. We don't know where to necessarily look for our wounds. We only have experience of them existing by the way we relate to others. As an example, a client came to me with relationship troubles, and she was surprised when I knelt down to adjust her feet. And as we did this, all these tears of grief showed up, and they had to do with her parents, which she'd lost when she was young. So, who, when someone comes with a relationship issue, looks at their feet? And that's the point. Her relationship challenges that she'd had for a lifetime were able to resolve, and she soon after met someone that she could relate to deeply and have a rewarding relationship. It doesn't mean it's the end of being human. It doesn't mean it's the end of all issues. It's just how many hundreds of hours could you talk in talk therapy and not find those feet, metaphorically, or not find where the issue was anchored? Another client, I touched her shoulder and all these tears came out. And she never got to grieve her father. So her body had stored it in her shoulder because she remembered her father pulling her across the street before he passed away. That's a very beautiful, subtle, complex way that the body stores memories that have yet to be processed. And that's, some people touch on the mystical qualities of this, the cranial sacral practitioners and writers, various somatic writers, because as you work on the unconscious, which lives at various levels of the body, you start to see how intricately threaded together these all are. And that's all well and good to read about it. However, I want you to actually experience that release and that full freedom. That's another thing we look for, is wholeness. I wish I felt whole and complete. You ever go around with that feeling? No matter what you do, it's like, this moment is great, except this. I love myself, except my feet, or my this, or my that. What about just I love myself as I am? That's a certain resonance frequency in your whole body. And I felt that when a practitioner was putting me in touch with my feet, I felt this, I am physically experiencing fullness and completeness for the first time in my life. Isn't that a shock? Who would have thunk that it had to do with your whole, with something to do that was what we refer to as somatic or body-based, the soma versus the psyche in the Greek. Those are the origins of those words. So in my experience, the psyche and the soma, the mind and the body, are so intimately connected. One simply has to look at the whole and let go of materialistic worldviews we'd been indoctrinated with. I think some people go way far the other way, and they're out of their body, but they're like waving around crystals. Not that crystals don't have their place. It still comes back to the fundamental piece of this tool, this instrument you have for living life. Life happens where your body meets the present moment. How is it showing up? How is it functioning? Where is it disconnected? Like, you can energetically amputate pieces of yourself, and you probably have. It's like when you decline, I don't like that part of myself. I don't like that part of myself. Women are like, I don't like my butt. I don't like my feet. So as you start to love and approve of those pieces of yourself, that not only heals the issues you're experiencing in that area or around that area, as the energy in the body has to circulate around, circumvent those cutoffs, it also heals the psychology, and the whole level of vitality raises. Because now you're walking out in the world with feet, and you and your feet exist, and you're standing upon the earth. People say, I've been on my feet all day. And I always wonder what that even means. You haven't been on your feet all day. Your feet are a part of you. I know it's just semantics, and as Werner Erhard said, I believe there are two things, nothing and semantics. Semantics is everything, because how you language is how you perceive. Your body is the manifestation of your beliefs. If you say you have a bad back or bad knees, I don't even like to say this because I feel I have to shake it off afterwards. Then that re-anchors. So part of what we do, part of what I do with clients, and part of what I show people how to do is not re-anchor whenever you speak the thing, because you're catching yourself in endless loops. And the problem, or the physical symptoms, are not so much the main problem. We just think they are. You can go out in the world and live a full life with a sore shoulder. We tend to say, for one thing, the shoulder is tight, well, touching it re-anchors it in. And as we look around the world, everything is tainted with this sensation here. The sensation here gets so focused that we forget the rest of our body. So that makes sense, right? You get what you focus on. And this is why we bring in the word "and" a lot, in this inclusivity, in this breaking out of duality. The shoulder is, we say, there's room for release in the shoulder, right? I'm noticing some room for release there, versus this is tight, I have this lifelong shoulder, I have a bad shoulder, blah, 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 blah. Each one of those is more dynamically anchored into the consciousness as part of your being, which is completely unnecessary and harmful. So where have you adopted these identities? I have this, I have that, I have this, I am that, where you can let that go. Like, I used to think I had all these illnesses and diseases around. I'm allergic to wheat or dairy or eggs or whatever, which a lot of people are. They think they are. And then you say that more and more, and it anchors that in more and more. Your body tightens around it. There's like worry about those foods, and then like a microdose causes an issue. Instead of, I choose not to eat those because in the moment I'm noticing these symptoms when I eat United States grown wheat or whatever. So there's subtleties in the distinctions too. Like the problems we adopt are some blanket, I have X, some disease that someone named. It's a very vague and broad thing, but as I adopt it, there are 12 other symptoms I didn't have, which now I start to manifest because I need to fit into the rubric of this identity so that I can feel at least clarity around this thing that I think I have. Like humans they're like birds soaring in freedom, and then they want to land on a branch. I believe this thing, I'm not moving. And they get knocked off the branch. I believe this thing. So we tend to cling to beliefs, even however erroneous they are. And believe me, they are erroneous. And the point of this, a lot of what we learn about our body is wrong. When I say break out of materialist programming or dogma, it's because you go somewhere, if you go to a doctor with an issue, like take this antidepressant, well, that may make you like suicidal, right? In the literature, I'm not a medical practitioner, so you don't necessarily, that's not the solution. Particularly, it's not the solution if it makes the problem 10 times worse. Is that logical? Am I crazy? Because recently I was considered I've harbored this belief since I was young, and recently it became controversial because of all the worldwide propaganda campaign. And people just, if you keep getting hit in the face with the same thing, you're like, eventually like, what, the pink elephant that's hitting me in the face. Now I believe that's a real thing. Beware of pink elephants, right? So even me, like I'm wary of endlessly looking at the same news sources because they're programming you, even if you think you're too smart for that. And the powers that be know this. If you're too smart for that, then you'll just take longer to get programmed, or you'll be in the program thinking about subtle distinctions. You're still, screwed in that sense. So humans have been under these weights for a long, long time. I'm not going to go into alternative history. However, it's a beautiful time now because we're freeing ourselves of those. And we have to somewhat use our intuition because a lot of practitioners historically had been shut down who even touched upon these truths. Like Wilhelm Reich, he would work on the armors in the body through touch and this thing he called orgone, which is the life force, and he would look at that at a microscope and see how different practices affected it. And he was shut down and imprisoned and died soon after of heartbreak. And he hid all of his writings in a time capsule to be released later. He just said, I'm ahead of my time, forget about it. And Royal Rife healed people with frequencies, and he had a staggering success rate. And you're healing someone with something that's almost free. So the AMA or the FDA went in and smashed all his ocular equipment because he was looking also through a microscope and seeing what particles broke up or what changed under certain frequencies, because he was something like an ocular prodigy. He invented all like this levels of magnification that were unknown before. So that's two examples, and there are many more. Jung kind of getting ostracized from the psychoanalytic mainstream by Freud and Freud's daughter, and etc., because he started to look outside and he started to experience what we're talking about, how the unconscious lives at these various levels and they express at the level of myth. So that's as important as looking at the libido and the thanatos in the Freudian sense, though those are relevant. And we're trained to think this is true and this is false, and it's not at all the case. So how this applies to your healing is that if you can just show up open in your body, in the body that you're inhabiting right now, you start to get to freed and loosened up, and you get to interact with a human. Like a human in front of you, they have different opinions than you. So we'll shut down. Your old armoring shows up when your stepfather or your mother or whatever like whacked you physically or proverbially. Then that armor is like, ooh, I'm bracing for impact because this person has a different opinion than me. And those are worlds apart, but to the body and the unconscious and the frozen consciousness level of a 7-year-old, they're not worlds apart. They're kind of similar. So we need to kind of heal and reprocess and swing back through to pendulate in and out of that challenge. I think that's a Peter Levine phrase. And I don't do a somatic experiencing in that sense because that's a little bit of a watered down version to help other people. I'm more of a crash course, like get in there and do the thing. I don't have to scale out so broadly that it's completely diluted the impact. Like people sit up after one of these sessions where you're breaking up all the past and they're like, ooh, I think I need to change my name. I'm like, it's so different now, this world. What was I doing? And that's the beauty and the power of it. Someone said, when you left my house last time, I felt reborn, and I haven't felt like that in so long. And then I gradually slipped back into my patterns because she had moved and we were in different places. So this is an invitation to be reborn to the challenges you think you have. And the New Age world, it frees people up in some ways and imprisons them in others. So it's just this level of subtle distinctions. Most people don't have that capacity. And when I say like most people, I mean you, and I mean I. Like I fall into untruths sometimes too, because the mind continually can be tricked and it lies. So that's why it needs to be paired with the body. There's the pelvic center, the heart center, the head center, and all these three centers need to be in a line. Like physically in a line, I'm bending over right now because this camera's in a weird place, and metaphorically in a line. Like we tend to think thoughts emotionally, so we're mixing up these centers, or we'll respond instinctually when it should be logically, for instance, or when that's when we love someone because they look good on paper, but we don't really have any resonance with them as a human. So that's the reason we need to come into the body, because the mind lies. When someone sits down and say, tell me, like, what's happening? What's going on? How's your life going? And they start crying and they start speaking about things. And then like within a word or two, like some version of lies come out unbeknownst to them. And I don't know the details yet. I just thought, like there's a resonance of something that's not true there. And they don't even know they're doing it. And I don't know yet. I just intuit that they're doing it because there's these compartmentalized versions of ourselves. There's like a big buffer between them and they never touch. So they don't know each other. This story over here cannot live with this story. If they hit each other, one of them has to die, expire, perish. And so that's a lot of what work we're doing is these collapsing these stories that had lived separately. Like someone could be the one that gives you everything and takes care of you, and the most villainous person on earth. So how can the most villainous person on earth also take care of you and give you everything you need? Like somehow those stories need to meet and become a more objective version of the story. The mind has trouble with that. You notice how I say the mind instead of mind? Like people say, I hold on to things, or I'm anxious, or I have trouble with this or that, blah, 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 blah. And I say the mind does this or that because it detaches you. People get so freaked out about this. By the way, I didn't study through the traditional psychological trainings, fortunately, because whenever I talk to those people, they're like, no, this is completely limiting. You need to teach it as though it's completely limiting. So that's a plus and a minus in the sense that people have come to me with, this thing can't be healed. They told me so. And I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do. And then the thing is gone like in a month. So part of it is what I'm saying, like changing the stories, detaching the anchors, freeing yourself, freeing those you've held blaming, because we're not blaming anymore. The moving to the next level is a level of sovereignty where you're responsible for your inner states. And when I say responsible, it's like anything could happen around you, and you gradually learn to choose what response you're going to bring to that equation. And that's the power and the beauty. And that runs kind of in contrast to the culture where, boom, here's the program, here's the response you're supposed to have. Oh, you're not having that response, let's move the program over here, check your response, boom. So people are like, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm sad, right? And then you're caught in this limited thing, which keeps you locked in your traumas, which re-anchors them, because that's in and of itself traumatic. And then, like I said, the person with a different opinion is then the villain. So if we go into the body, the memories arise that are real, and you start to see them as real, and you start to distinguish the fictitious memory from the experiential memory. And then you just, like, the memory stops somewhere and there's a blank space, then we just kind of go into it. Your body, your senses start to fill in the gaps. People see things, people hear things. Sometimes I'd lean in when we were talking about certain memories, and people would smell like whiskey of their grandfather, and I don't drink, so it wasn't me, right? Or they'll smell like cigar smoke or pipe smoke, or whatever the faculties need to bring up to reconnect. Sometimes there's clues like, oh, I smell something, I taste something, I feel something. Remember, your body is your instrument for living life. If your sense of smell or your taste or your touch or your eyes have been hijacked by some incomplete memory, you're going to have a limited capacity for the moment. So that's what I want to do, invite you back to the moment so that you can be more and more free. Isn't that beautiful? So I had a near-death experience, and that inspired the creation of this Philomela protocol, where we go deep into the consciousness and there's this rebirth process. And I also have this uprooting of all the filaments of thought, and that's the rapture protocol. A way to move from a materialist, self-centered, trauma-ridden being to an altruistic, spiritual, ultimately compassionate being. Now that's not step A to step B. That's just laying out the map and moving toward in that direction, which you know by the level of the consciousness of your thoughts. Uproot a thought that was negative, gradually entrain yourself to experience more positive thoughts. Like I said at the beginning, we don't even know. We're fighting a war and we don't even know who the enemy is. We're like stabbing the one that's trying to save us, and we're celebrating the one that's imprisoning us. You can take that however you want. It's just psychologically, in myths and such, that is an archetypal story. You don't have to think that I'm just talking about politics. You can watch this perhaps 100 years from now and it's a similar thing. So we humans have to find freedom and self-sovereignty amidst corroded leadership, where there's sometimes beacons of people that are alive and empowered and like gracious to us and doing things for our own good. And then usually they tip over into power hunger and they start taking money under the table or pillaging and plundering unseen or manipulating the news. And then, we again need to replace them. And the point is to stay alive ourselves, because the leadership arises out of the collective consciousness of the way we're all being. So like, let's say Trump or Biden or RFK Jr. or whoever else, you notice that you look up and they're rising to fill the void that we're creating. So we come back to personal self-sovereignty and we start to create a different equation, and different leaders will show up, or those leaders will show up differently. So this is a invitation to be the leader of yourself and the sovereign lord of your own life, let's say. And this also includes like surrendering to a divine power, because I always think that things happen for a reason. Moreover, I know that if you say that to someone who's in a process of grief, they'll say, no, they don't. This was by accident. However, if you gradually introduce that concept, then it will facilitate healing in and of itself. This woman helped her traumatic brain injury be overcome, because when she came, she was like, I have a traumatic brain injury, I can't work. So that's a lot of anchoring in this story. So that's where we were like, okay, you notice these symptoms in these moments, and you notice these other symptoms in these moments. What are you noticing right now? Well, right now I'm not noticing anything. Ooh, so like there's a window where you're not noticing anything. Nothing is not is not the highest aim, but it's you're not noticing your ailment. So then we start to notice other things, the feet, the heart, the lungs, the head, and then we start to like open up the windows where that injury is not ruling you, that trauma is not ruling you, that disease is not ruling you. And death is not the biggest thing to be afraid of necessarily. So if you go to your deathbed, be at peace rather than be like, I'm never going to die. Because those are the people that die the soonest, paradoxically, the ones that are always obsessing over it. The reason I say that is because this brings back to light that there's a spiritual aspect of this healing. You're working to heal your life, and that has to do with seen and unseen realms being healed, so that you leave this life in a different state and you move to the next phase in a different state, and then you gather that info and you move to whatever the next thing is. You could call it reincarnation, and that could be literal, metaphorical. Nobody knows exactly how that's working in any given moment. They only have historical records of it. So once again, you say in the past it worked like this. Going forward, I'm not exactly sure. We have some evidence. And there's your angels, your guidance, your whatever are working with you to help heal. So it's easier to heal because you start to come into alignment with more powerful systems and beings and archetypes, and they start to like usher you forward. Versus saying stuck, it's like they're pulling you, these other things are pulling you, everything's pulling you. That's harder because you have to resist in all these ways. Give up the resistance. That's the point of this. Wherever your body is hung up somewhere, like your leg could be flexing right now and you wouldn't know it, or your foot could be flexing, or your diaphragm could not be opening, your part of your spine could be and you don't know it. But that's because you're resisting being guided in all these directions. So surrendering is pivotal, and that's part of what this is. So as I touch the body, there's armoring. It's like if I'm thinking of touching this client's belly and it kept pushing me out, and then I touch again, push me out. And you could do this in almost any part of the body. It's like, how vulnerable can you be when someone's like leaning into you? That shows how you're relating to other people. And the answer is probably not that vulnerable. I mean, there's the opposite case where someone's like, I just push in, they're just like, they don't feel anything because they're so disconnected. In those cases, we have to reconnect. Like, can you feel this? This is pretty deep. Are you sure you don't feel anything? And then they're like, oh yeah, and then they start shaking, and there's sometimes tears. And on the other side, there's people that the armoring and the energy goes toward that right away. And then there's like releasing and deepening and coming to the core and feeling that presence of another, and like opening to where that lockup started, etc. So the beauty is that there's not one answer. There's only one strategy, and that's to complete whatever was incomplete from the past so that you can live fully in the moment. And we do this because whatever was incomplete in the past is in the body somewhere. So that's the whole point of this whole tirade. So thank you so much. Again, I'm Stephen Button. Follow, subscribe. I will go more into this. I have the Rapture papers on Substack. If you comment Rapture, I'll send you a little overview. if you want to do some work together, you can apply. I only work with people that are doing interesting things that inspire me, and that's just the way the way it has been. So I'm also putting together group events. So if you get on my list, you'll hear about those. These are ways to introduce some of these concepts, in a more group communal way, because there's power in that. There's power and beauty in that. That actually can facilitate more healing in some ways, rather than being just a dilution of what I do. So thank you so much. I'll see you on the other side.